Well, welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name is Nicole Rollbush and I'm a Practice Development Officer with Emerging Minds here to facilitate today's discussion. It's fantastic to have you all here with us, and also welcome to those of you who might be tuning in later to the recording. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, who are the traditional owners of the lands in Adelaide, which is where I'm coming to you from. And I'd like to extend that acknowledgement to all of the different lands across the country that you're all joining us from today. And you're welcome to share in the chat the lands you're on today. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, the young ones coming up, and recognise the deep connection that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have with the lands and waterways and kin and community and culture, and extend that acknowledgement and pay my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. So before we begin, just got a little bit of housekeeping to cover before I introduce our fantastic panelists. So we have a live Q&A at the end, the last 15 minutes of this webinar. So please submit questions via the question tab that you'll see on the GoToWebinar dashboard, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. The webinar is also being recorded, so that will be available in about 2 weeks for you to keep an eye out in the aifs news, and that will be on the aifs and Emerging Minds websites as well. We do have a great list of related resources which are available in the handouts tab, which you'll see on the GoToWebinar dashboard as well. Being mindful, you know, it's a big topic. We're not going to be able to cover everything, but just to say the panelists have some amazing experience, so I feel like we are covering a lot of ground, but we do have those extra resources there for you as well. And a short feedback survey will open at the end of the webinar, and we'd really love it if you could give us your feedback. It helps us to make these even better for all of you in the webinars to come. And before we begin as well, I just wanted to give recognition to people with lived experience. I want to recognise that children and young people and adults that are within families and diverse communities with many and varied experiences, lived experiences, who've come before us, and just really appreciate the experiences of people whose pain and trauma and heartache, including harmful systemic practices, they require recognition and compassion. And I recognise the strengths and the know-how that children and families draw on during difficult times, and respect those skills that people have developed to continue their lived experience. And I know at aifs and at Emerging Minds, we're really deeply committed to listening and responding with integrity to their voices and expertise, and really appreciate when lived experience can be shared with us. And this is a complex topic. You know, we're talking about child protection, so it might include discussion of why children are living in care, potentially including topics like child abuse and neglect. So please, you know, if you do require assistance or would like to talk to a trained professional, if anything sort of comes up for you today, there are resources in the handouts tab of the GoToWebinar dashboard as well for you. So we have a pretty great webinar here today, I must say so myself. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context before our panelists jump in. So as of June 2021, there are about 46,200 Australian children in care. So we're talking across foster care, kinship care and residential care. And at this time, it included approximately 19,500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, which is about 42.3% of all children in care. So a huge, you know, continued overrepresentation of Aboriginal children in many systems in our country. And we know, you know, from the vast literature out there on out-of-home care that children who do live in care are more likely to experience anxiety and depression, issues with aggression and impulsivity, and engage in self-harm when they're compared with children who've never lived in out-of-home care. But what often gets missed from the conversation is the way that children in care can grow up to be adults who are resilient and kind and amazing contributors to society as well. So while we're acknowledging these numbers and these outcomes and, you know, the significant challenges within the child protection system as well, and today we'll cover some of those, but we really want to focus on what practitioners can do despite these challenges, particularly in terms of supporting children's voice, sense of self-worth, identity and belonging. And just to note, we'll be focusing on children up to 12 years, so care leavers won't be addressed in this webinar. So I'm very lucky today to be introducing these three people to you. I'm joined by Paula May, Meryl Klimczak and Dana Shen. So I might just get you to all jump in and introduce yourselves briefly and just a bit about your role, and if you can share something about what sustains you in this role, that would be fantastic. So Dana, I might jump to you first.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nicole, and it's so lovely to be joining all of you today. So my name is Dana Shen. I'm Ngarrindjeri Chinese. I'm based in South Australia. The Ngarrindjeri are people of where the river joins the sea. My role is I'm a consultant, but much of my experience is in the public sector. So I've worked in social service delivery, and as a consultant, I've worked with many different NGOs, ACOs, Aboriginal community, etc. And in terms of what sustains me is I really believe in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and I believe in the philosophy and principles of First Nations ways of being and doing that can actually help all of us. So that's why I do it, and that's how I'm sustained. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dana. It's great to have you here. Meryl, I'll invite you to jump in.
Hi everyone, my name is Meryl. I am coming to you today from Paramount Country in the beautiful Adelaide Hills. I'm a mum to 2 heart babies who are 21 and 25 and 3 belly babies who are 11, 13 and 16. And you might be wondering, what's a heart baby, what's a belly baby? Heart babies are my kids who've come into my life through my heart. So foster, adoption, tag-alongs, hanger-oners, all of the above, and belly babies are my biological children. So I try to make sure that others understand the value that I place on all of my children, regardless of how they came into my life. Why do I keep continuing as a foster mum? Really, it's down to my core belief that we all deserve to have one in our lives. Every human needs one person that they know backed them, championed them, cared for them, nurtured them, held them on their ugliest days, celebrated them on their best days. And if for a day, a week, a month, a lifetime, for my 25-year-old who came into my home as a 6-year-old, if for that short period of time, I can actually be a visual and a heart representation to a child that they actually are deserving of the one person who believes in them, and that maybe down the track they'll remember this old lady who believed in them, then I've done my job. And it's, yeah, that's what keeps me going.
Fantastic. Thanks, Meryl. It's great to have you. And Paula, on to you.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. Paula May here. I come from Ghanaland in South Australia today. I think, you know, throughout my career, mainly focusing on residential care in and around child protection programs. I think what motivates me the most is more so what comes first, which is early intervention and reunification. Supporting families to stay together through therapeutic intervention, holistic support, and targeted education is pivotal. I think secondly, though, if we're not able to achieve that reunification, once a child is in care, what really motivates me is more so that reconciliation with family, that deep connection that children hold to their families and culture is so important. So whilst they may not be able to return home to their families, you know, a huge factor in my career is supporting more programs to focus on reconciliation at a minimum to ensure that that connection can continue between the child and their birth family.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Paula. Great to have you as well. So let's jump into the conversation. And I wanted to start by asking you, Paula, and I'll get you to jump in later on this one, Dana, is so we're focusing today on you know, conversations or activities that can increase participation, identity, and self-worth. Why should practitioners take time to focus on that, and what difference can these things make for children in care?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Look, children in care have already experienced extensive trauma, both from the events that took place prior to being removed from their families, and these events have often gone on for years prior to child protection services becoming involved. Children in care have then experienced a second wave of trauma from the actual process of being removed. We know that most children in care don't want to be taken away by services. The process itself of removal is brutal, to say the least. Parents want their child back, but don't have the capacity to understand their actions, or often they lack the ability to actually enact the change that the Child Protection Agency is asking of them. And children, they just want their mum and dad, despite what might have gone on in the family home. They want to be a family unit. You know, to be honest, once a child's removed, if they're lucky, they might be placed in the one household that can provide the care that they so desperately need. But generally, what research and statistics tell us is that they're likely to have multiple placements following that initial removal from family. And so, you know, having these multiple placements, getting moved around, you know, it could be for a number of reasons. A carer might have a change in circumstances. There might be a change in residential funding, and often it can be perhaps due to the child's actual behaviours. We know that they've often got complex trauma with associated complex behaviours, and so a carer or agency might not be able to cope with that young person anymore, so the placement might be terminated. So what you are then often left with is a child that has, you know, complex trauma, poor attachments, loss of connection to family and community, loss of identity of who they are and what their place in the world is, and really little to no connection to anyone. So attachment, you know, being that key word there, given it's pivotal for childhood development. So when you look at all of those things, you know, considered, the importance that we all play as practitioners, and anyone that's listening to this webinar today, the importance that we play in actually supporting that child to have participation, have identity, and a real true sense of self-worth, so that they can, you know, go on to thrive and lead meaningful lives, is just so important to all of us. You know, pivotal to this is these children need to be given a chance, and a meaningful chance at life that's full of kindness and love is everyone's business. And so, you know, the importance of attending these webinars and just as practitioners, just be continuously learning and examining our own practices and seeking better outcomes for young people. It should be a never-ending journey for any practitioner to just be, like I said, just continuously evolving, you know, how we practice, looking at our systems and our methods of support. It's vital.
Yeah.
And for me, Nicole, if I can jump in there, I think Paula said it all beautifully. So, but very briefly, a couple of things that I think is really important. As the question is really posed for practitioners, and I've taken that to mean people that are paid to do this work as a professional in the system. We come in to do this as a job. You know, it is our job that we do, and we get paid for that job, and then we go home to our lives. But actually, the job that we're doing when we're working with children and young people in out-of-home care, we're working with someone's life. This is their whole life that we're working with. And we get to go back to our lives, but that is their life. And so it's really important that we can always remember that, despite any of the challenges, which we'll talk about a bit later. In the end, the most important thing is that this is a human life. And the second part of it, I think that's really important, is that so much of our lives are about stories. They're about the stories that we tell ourselves. They're about the stories that have been created by the people around us. And they can be very hurtful stories. And as people in this role, we can actually help and work alongside young people to be able to rewrite their stories. You know, they can tell it in the way that they need to and want to, and they can be the authors of that for their future. So I'll talk a bit more about that later, but I think that that's an opportunity for us to really give them a sense of a different kind of story in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paula and Dana. And I kind of, it makes you think about that a lot of the conversation, around the child protection system and children in care can be deficit focused, and those deficit stories can come through and obviously really impact on those things that we're talking about: identity, self-worth, and feeling like you've got a voice. I think it's certainly important that we acknowledge that there are those systems constraints and that sort of thing, but thinking about what practitioners can do within their sphere of influence to support children's mental health. And Dana, I'll start by asking you this one, and then invite Meryl and Paula to jump in. What are some examples of the constraints that might exist in the system that perhaps some of the people, or many of the people listening, will be very familiar with, but also some of the things you've been able to do in your work to support children despite these constraints, or in the face of them?
Thanks, Nicole. I think there's kind of two frameworks that I'd like to bring in here that have made a big difference to how I think about how I walk alongside people. So I think the first one is that I want to introduce the concepts of systems theories, or complex systems. So really, if we think about our human social service system, a lot like an organism, we have lots of different parts to it that interact with one another. It's complex. Sometimes we can't control how it works. But ideally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have a particular aim and move the system of, or the organism that we're in, towards a common goal. So if I give Dana as an example. So Dana, what is Dana? Is Dana just my hands, or is Dana just my heart or my liver? No, actually Dana is a combination of all the things that are not only inside me but are outside of me, that create the movement towards whoever Dana is. Similar to the system that we're in. When we're working in social service systems, we're all different parts, but we're trying to work towards the same thing overall. And so what we want to try to do is, at every level of that system, whether you're an individual or you're a team or you're an organisation or you're relating to other systems or whatever it is, you're trying to build a system that is working together in a congruent way towards caring for people, being trauma responsive in the way we do it, and really doing things where we're bringing in compassion and ways of working that really, really benefit human life in what we're doing. So I want to introduce that because I talk about it a bit later. But the other one I really want to introduce is something that I really believe, because it helps us to see the strength in people, is I like to see, when I think about children and young people, I like to think about them as the heroes of their own journey. So we're not there to save them or be saviors of them. Actually, they have strength. They've been through adversity, and they can get through. They can get through. But who are we? Around us, we're their band. We're their people that can join them and bring the skills that we have, if I can say the magic that we have. We think about stories like Lord of the Rings and Frodo Baggins and the band that walked alongside him. We're walking alongside these young people to actually provide what we can. But we always know that at the centre of this, they're the ones that's their life. We're there to be with them, and they have the strength and the wonder and the magic to do this for themselves. So I just wanted to introduce those two concepts, because I know Meryl and Paula will give very great examples about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, Meryl, I'll get you to jump in. Thanks, Dana. I love that hero aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree, Nicole and Dana. That's such a beautiful mind picture of how we can approach our care. And I come today with a foster mum lens, not a practitioner lens. And I've seen it play out for children where we being the systems have prioritized fitting children into the system, as opposed to creating and making systems, designing them, and then implementing systems that are actually supportive of children. So we've kind of sometimes got it a bit backwards. And I've seen instances where decision makers have been so focused and vigilant about following the rules, the procedures, the policies, the system, that children have actually missed out. And I'll just give two quick examples today of where that's happened in my experience. And I've been a foster mum for over 20 years, had lots and lots of kids for varying lengths of time. So, sorry, that was terrible.
Okay?
That was my picture. I'm okay. Let's keep going. So I will give just two examples today. One being confidentiality. Confidentiality is a really important part of protection for children and a really important aspect of the system. But what it does in its outworking is it creates this idea of fragmented parts in children's memory bank of the significant people, the significant moments, the significant events, the good, the bad, and the ugly events in their lives. And it makes it difficult for those who children are with today to kind of piece together and validate what it is that children are trying to say and the stories that they are expressing to you, to find that sense of belonging and to find that sense of place for themselves. I've had kids come who've had, I've got nothing. I've got a first name and that's about it. And they've stayed for a while. And I haven't been able to support them and nurture them and reassure them that their experience has been true and valid, juxtaposed to other instances where I've had a couple of kids come and they had a remarkable, just a little booklet that had some key about me things, their favourite book, their favourite TV show, their favourite story, their biggest worries today, what happens to their body and their voices when they become really anxious and when they're scared. And what do they like to eat? Those things matter for children. And I had a child arrive, 6 years old, and I'd had this little booklet. And I said to this young boy, okay, first night, you want Hungry Jack's, you want KFC, you want Macca's. What do you want? Anything you feel like, thinking any 6-year-old young lad might actually like to have a happy meal and a Coke and a sundae. He wanted baked beans. And I knew about the baked beans on his arrival or just prior to his arrival, so I could prepare a pantry of baked beans. And what that said to him was, I matter. She knows. She's without even that sort of mental necessary, that mental connection for the child, there was the sense of welcome and the sense of familiarity for them. The other part, just very quickly, is around attachment and that uncertainty of life. Most practitioners here will know about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the triangular system, the bottom two in our systems of physiological needs and safety, we tend to address really well in children, but then it kind of gets a little bit lost after that. The idea that, we can't always be certain of what's going to happen in a child's future, but somehow we need to create a sense of certainty in that uncertainty, and allowing children to verbalize their fear of what's going to happen in the future. And as in my role as a foster mum, and perhaps for practitioners as well in a clinical setting, is giving permission for that uncertainty to be okay, and supporting the young child or the young person. I don't know what's going to happen, But whatever happens, let me see if I can help you. If you've got a question and I don't have the answer to it, that's okay. I'll go and ask someone who might have the answer, and I will come back to you with what it is that you're needing, or help you to figure out the next bit of your question. My 25-year-old son who's with me now, I remember when he first came, he was on a GOM 12 order. He was 6 years old. His hearing was going to be in a couple of months' time. His first tangible, painful, sad, sorrowful moment for me was when he said to me, "Where am I going next?" He's 6 years old. Where am I going next? He didn't want to put his roots down because he assumed, he stayed, got through to a GOM 18 order in 2017. And I remember him saying to me, "Oh, Mum, so this means we can be a forever family." It mattered to him, but there was still not that certainty in his mind, because he knew that there were instances he was still under guardianship of the minister. Something could happen. When he was in 2012, when he was 15, we were granted OPG, other person guardianship, for him, which meant that guardianship came to me. And I remember laying on our bed in the front room, in my room with the court papers, and he said to me, "So, Mum, does this actually really mean that no one will ever come and be able to take me away again?" It matters. Finally, at 15, he had certainty. That's not afforded to all children in care. But what is afforded to them is our commitment to stay with them and to not leave them alone, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, physically. Stick by them, lean into them. Yeah, we can work the system.
Thanks, Meryl. Thanks for sharing that. And Paula.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I mean, I'll touch on parts that both Dana and Meryl have spoken about, but to be honest, language is key, and when we consider language, it's not just about how we speak about the system, it's more so the language we use regarding children in care and what we want to focus on. And to be honest, the old saying of water what you want to grow comes to mind. So if we want to look at developing identity, self-worth, and giving young people a voice, children need to hear beyond the behavioural and situational focus of their lives, and more so need to understand the world around them and their place in it. Conversations should, in fact, all practitioners focus on who they want in their lives and what their definition of a happy and fulfilling life are. So if we look at perhaps the overall goal is to focus on that deep listening for practitioners, deep listening for that young person and who they want in their lives, what's their definition of a happy life, etc. You need to ensure the young person or the child feels heard. And to be honest, the secret ingredient to all of this is authentic engagement. What we know about the challenges, though, if we look at residential care, which is certainly my area of experience. So one of the major barriers, in fact, in residential care is having this truly authentic engagement with young people. It's hard, mainly because one of the biggest focuses in residential care is maintaining appropriate boundaries to ensure no abuse in care takes place, which we totally get. Abuse in care is not okay. It does happen. We always need to be vigilant and always be really mindful of it. However, this focus on risk, this focus on managing boundaries has often prevented the key thing that children in care actually need, which is that authentic engagement. And authentic engagement, like Meryl was just talking about, these children have been through so much. So when they get to residential care, they're often in rotation care, staff are moved around. There's not always anyway, there's a real lack of love and care and that genuine, authentic engagement that these young people so desperately need. What some examples of what you might be able to do and where I've perhaps challenged it in the past. So one of the key examples, in fact, that I had in residential care is ensuring that the Child Protection Agency knew the different model that you were going to be working under. So I made sure they knew that we were really mindful of boundaries, really mindful of keeping young people safe, but that we weren't just going to follow a risk management process for engagement. We were also going to work within the risk to ensure that we could have that meaningful, authentic engagement with young people. So an example, if a child needed a hug, which they do, they need to have a hug to feel that sense of well-being and connection and identity. So making sure that a child in residential care can have a hug when they need it. We manage that risk by making sure the caseworker notes it and why it was given. What is the actual meaning behind and the need behind, I guess, exploring some of those risks. If the worker shared photos of themselves, perhaps in their own school days, making sure the caseworker would note that, you know, why that was done. All of these types of authentic engagement are so vital for that young person developing that sense of identity and self-worth, and to ensure that there's that authentic engagement so that a child can feel that their voice is being heard. If you've got the relationship and you've got the connection, you will be able to support that child through no end of challenges. So yeah, I'll finish on that, but I can't stress enough the importance of that authentic engagement.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Paula. So important. And I might just jump ahead a little bit with you guys and move on to how do we create a sense of identity and belonging and self-worth for children living in out-of-home care? What are some things that you might have tried? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Yeah, I might throw to you, Paula, just to answer that one first. Yeah.
And look, to sound like a broken record, that authentic engagement needs to come into it. So for all practitioners to be investing the time in the relationship, and to be honest, it's you need to have an element of likability. Okay, you need to have a connection with a young person, because if you've got likability, you're going to have a connection, and with connection comes authentic engagement. So the importance of, you know, explaining boundaries, yes, but above all, having that connection with that young person is vital. Yeah, that's probably key for me.
Yeah, great. And what about you, Verdana? What sort of things have you maybe tried in your work?
Mm-hmm. So I want to sort of introduce some thinking regarding identity, and in particular in relation to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and what's been useful for me to best understand what this all means. So I'll talk a bit more about it over time, but by the time, you know, as Paula was touching on, by the time a child gets to be in care, they've already gone through so many complicated experiences, and they've gone through a lot of painful experiences. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we have another layer of issues that sit alongside that. And that is that we're in a world where, and in a country where we experienced colonisation. And what that meant for us is that it creates very, very different understandings of what culture can mean for us now. So we can have children, young people, or adults in our community who have no connection at all to where they come from, what their practices are, etc. We can have those that, due to removal, can lose a lot of that because of what's happened in their lives and the need for it to be elsewhere in their lives. Then we can have those that have really, really deep connections as well. They do understand where they come from. So it's actually, the question is, how do we, with some nuance and some skill, respond to the spectrum of that identity? And what I think is really important in this is that we can understand that, but also we come back to the individual in front of us as the hero of this journey, as the leader of this story. How do we work alongside them with all that knowledge for them to make choices about what's best for them when it is the right time for them to make those choices. So I'll talk a bit more about that, but I think fundamentally it's the nuanced understanding of cultural identities. If more of us could grow that for ourselves, that would actually make us more useful for people and more useful for children and young people that are looking at that. So I think that would be, I'll start there, but I'll talk about that a bit more later.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Thanks for that intro to that. Yeah, we'll chat about that more in a minute. And what about for you, Meryl? How have you sort of tried to create this sense of identity and self-worth for children?
It's so interesting because each time each of us panelists answer a question, there's the similar thread that always comes through. And in this question, it's about the time. And like Dana touched on, that hero idea that, you know, children have in themselves already everything that they need to be and know about themselves. And we are there to support them to flourish from that point. We're not there to tell them their worth or to tell them, but we're there to guide them to discover their self-worth and to discover who they are. And, you know, there's an old idiom, time is of the essence. And if you look, you know, in a legal sense, that kind of speaks to time being an obligation in law. But in a child protection or in an out-of-home care setting, as a foster mum, time is of the essence is about those micro connections of time being so incredibly important and valuable for children. You know, we try to have this idea, or I guess maybe speaking in a practitioner sense, you've got an hour session with the child, and so you've got a block of time to input. But maybe as part of that block of time, instead of inputting from your skill, if the child or young person is giving those indicators that they want to show you a little bit about themselves, they want to bring out a bit of their story, they want to share or disclose something that's funny, interesting, memorable, good, bad, amazing, you know, even if it's what they had for lunch yesterday, that's really valuable. And if we take the time just in that little micro connection, you know, Brene Brown talks about bids of connection that we give to people where we're trying to offer an opportunity for someone else to lean back into us and to create that. And I think that experience is where maybe beyond theory, maybe under theory, maybe, you know, outside of everything that we learn as adults, and that knowledge, it's about that heart time. You know, there's one very, very quick story if I've got time. I had a young boy who was utterly distressed, and no words were working. And I found him after a few minutes in a cupboard amongst stinky shoes. And I spent probably 2 or 3 hours tucked into the stinky cupboard with the stinky shoes in the dark, door shut, no words. What he needed was time. And he just needed me to lean in without speaking, but my heart to connect to him and say, I can see you, I'm here with you, I believe in you, I'm making the time. Dinner's cooking out the back, you know, the other kids are rumbling around, but this is our moment. And you're showing me that you need me to come into where you are and help to draw out the best of you. And after a few hours, we came out of the cupboard and, you know, everything kind of ticked along. But it was the time, and the time was the essence for him in that moment.
Yeah, and that time, and I think, you know, Mel, before you've spoken about those sort of micro opportunities, those micro chances, and it doesn't have to be, you know, big blocks of time, but finding that time to connect. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
And Dana, I wanted to invite you to speak a little bit more about what you were just talking about, and really, you know, how can practitioners support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children to maintain the cultural connections and identity, and links to kin and community, where perhaps their link may be known or unknown, depending on their circumstances. So can you share a little bit more about that with us?
Yeah, cool. Yep. So I think the first thing to really say here is that we want whatever we do in a child and young person's life to be living and alive. So we can get, and I understand why we need it. We need to write things down. We have the cultural identity plan, and we've got to document things properly. But what we want to do is actually create something that's adaptive and really walks alongside young people. So it needs to be, where it's documented, it needs to be living and changing. So that's the first thing that I would say. It's not enough just to write something down and just to leave it. It's living and it's alive. The second thing is that I want to deal with the practical reality of this here. I know that there are times when practitioners don't actually have the information to even know where to start about someone's identity. They haven't even, in the referral, they don't even know. So that's part of the challenge. This is part of the barrier of this system. This can happen. So I think in those cases, what we don't want to do is get frozen or freeze around this. That's actually the reality. That happens all the time. And yet we have this human being in front of us that has a life to live. So for me, it's about how do we help young people, children, young people, explore what identity means in different ways, even if we don't have all the answers. And what I really want to invite people to think about is that whilst, core national weeks and days and things like that are super important for our community and are respectful about our elders and etc., like NAIDOC and Reconciliation Week, and they're very, very important, that we see that as one part of identity learning for children and young people, and that actually it's much more than that. So what else can we explore here? Whether or not we're clear about where people come from, what can we explore? We can explore the magic and the wonder of First Nations knowledges. Anybody can experience that. Is that about actually being in the world on someone's country? So my country is the Coorong, and the beauty of being on that land. I know children and young people love that too, because I've seen them there from all over the place coming to this place. For example, how to explore what it means to actually have traditions and practices like, bush foods and medicines and things like that. What does that mean? What does that mean for children and young people to learn about healing practices and things in our world? And also just to be able to go in deeper, the more that we find out about a child and young person, and as we go along, knowing that the complexity of identity can be mixed, and sometimes children and young people aren't ready. They don't want to go there. It's okay that they don't want to go there. But because we have an authentic relationship, as Paula talked about, we have an unconditional regard for this child and young person, we believe in them, we're going to follow them where they want to go, and we're going to take them where they want to go to learn this stuff. So that's all I would say, is that make it alive, and don't feel that you need to be frozen, because whatever a young person's at, the First Nations wonders and magic of what our people have done, that's good for anyone. And you can explain that to people and show them that. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. That's great. And it's that connection, regardless of whether a child is living within their community or not in their community, that those opportunities are, like you said, sort of they're everywhere to connect with that. So yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, I remember hearing an Aboriginal, I did this random thing where I was facilitating for landscape architecture, like that's really outside of the realm of the work that I normally do.
Yeah.
This beautiful woman said this quote. She said, look, we try to create centers, like the center of this is a building and we're going to call this culture. That's so important in our world, because that's what we live in. And we're having to regenerate and recreate things. So I don't want to say that that's not important. But one of the things that she said, which I think is so important for us to remember, is that culture is everywhere. Everywhere. So you can find those micro moments of culture and connection with the world everywhere for a young person. It's just that are your eyes and your ears open for that? Are you the one that can help that because you've done it and you understand that? So, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, love it.
Thanks, Dana. Fantastic. And I just wanted to ask one more question before we jump into the Q&A. I wanted to talk about voice and giving children in care a voice. I suppose that, you know, a voice in participation, but a voice about their story as well. We've talked a bit about that already. So, Dana, I might jump to you again first around that, but what are your thoughts on this?
So I think the really important thing, and I know that there's a level of repetitiveness in this, but I think it's important to say these things, you know. I think the first thing is that sometimes the voice of a child isn't the things that they say. It can be the things that are experienced and the way that they communicate with us in all sorts of ways. So we have a responsibility to have our ears, our eyes, our whole selves really, really deeply listening to what happens. Another thing that I think is really important is that, as we know, of course, that we don't want to hurt kids by having them retell stories and things like that. You know, that's important. We don't want to re-trigger or do any of those sorts of things. But when children, young people in their own time get to mention something or say something, and they sense an unconditional regard and a real listening from the person, then actually this can be a really important experience for them to make sense of these things. So I would say that the more that we can create spaces to do that in their own time, where we're in the right place to listen, that's very, very helpful to really hear a child's voice.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dana. And what about for you, Paula? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, a bit of a generalization, but I think as practitioners, we often fear going into a young person's story. You know, we don't want to re-traumatize them, like what Dana said. You know, we're scared of triggering something. And so often we do dance around it, to be honest, and we're mindful of what can we say, what can't we say. But what we're actually doing to a child in that process, you know, to actually support their identity and self-worth, is we're just watering down what their experience was. And we often water down what their experience was in telling them. You know, we might not tell them all the bits and pieces. And so it lacks authentic engagement when we're not giving them, I guess, the truth behind their own story. Now, of course, we need to be mindful. We can't tell them all the bits and pieces because often there's some really, really tricky things that a young person might not be able to comprehend. But what we need to do as practitioners is constantly challenge our understanding of how much we need to be talking to young people about their story and their journey in care, to be honest. We need to ensure that they feel acknowledged for their experience and actually understand that we've heard them. We understand what went on. What we also know about child protection is that it can form a cycle, and parents were often in care themselves. And so if we're not able to have a really genuine conversation with some of these young people about, you know, their story, why they're in care, where to from here, we're actually not supporting that breaking of the cycle. So more than anything, we just need to be encouraging ourselves and speaking, you know, with all the other people involved in that child's life to have a mutual understanding of sharing that child's story with them and giving them a deep sense of understanding of where they are at that moment.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about for you, Meryl? What comes to mind? How have you sort of given the children in your care a voice?
I think it's about, it's about the time, it's about the opportunities, it's about creating the space. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about my own insight into my own fear about and sadness and sorrow about what they're sharing with me, what their story is. You know, and like all of us here, I've heard some pretty awful stories and some pretty awful recounts. And if that's too much for me, that shows on my face. And it then becomes, I want to take that away. I want to remove the pain of that sorrow from them. But that's not actually my job. That's not my role. My role is to allow them safely to tell their story and to hold it with them. You know, I've not met a child yet in over 20 years that has divulged more than what they felt comfortable with. What I have seen is instances where other adults in their life have pulled more out of a child than what they were willing and ready to share and felt comfortable to share. And, you know, so that idea of be just for that storytelling and that, you know, be mindful, where's my heart at? And for me, it's okay if I cry. It's okay if I generate and show that emotion. You know, when a child is telling me a story that is devastatingly sad, maybe no one let them even tell the story. Maybe the last time they tried to tell the story to an adult, they were shut down, or it was clinical, or they were belted, you know, for sharing a sadness or a sorrow. But if I can be a mirror to them of another way that you can respond, another way that you can feel as that child about that situation, and creating a safe place for them. You know, I'm really sorry. I'm really sad that this happened for you. But I'm here. And I'm sorry that it wasn't safe then, but it's actually safe now. And kids will go on as they trust and feel comfortable, you know.
Yeah, the really common thread has been that relationship, hasn't it, and building that, and throughout all of this. Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing all of that with us and with the audience. And I wanted to move on to some live questions now. So we've had a few coming through from the audience. So thank you to those of you who have submitted some. And I also wanted to let you know as well, before we jump into those questions, that the panelists will be taking some extra time offline as well after the webinar to answer some additional questions. So that extended Q&A will be available when the recording's available in a couple of weeks as well. And I wanted to go back to, so I think one of the challenges that sort of comes up a bit for workers in out-of-home care is that, you know, violence and aggression can be present for children in care towards workers and those sorts of things. And I know that we've talked about this before, about how it can sort of switch people off to children's voice and things like that. But Meryl, I wanted to start with asking you what your experience of this has been, and what advice you might give practitioners to support children when they're experiencing these really big emotions, and what we can be mindful of.
Yeah, a while ago I heard someone say, I can be really scary when I'm scared. And for children, you know, coming into care is terrifying. Imagine the idea of heading to school one day, thinking it's a normal day, and you don't go home. And there's police officers and adults that you're not really familiar with saying, quick, get in the car, we're going to take you to safety. But that's not safe for the child, because the child felt safe at home in that environment of abuse and neglect. Not that that was right, but that was their sense of norm, you know, normality and safety. So when you scoop a child up, you put them in the car, you're taking them to safety, they come into my home, I've got soft sheets and the house smells fresh and it smells beautiful and everything's in order, and I've got food that's crunchy and fresh. But that's not their normal. They're terrified with that confronting environment. So in the context of how do we support children through those challenging behaviours, at the core of it they're scared. And because they're scared, they become scary to us as adults. So, yeah, you know, and when I put that lens on as a foster mum, and I remind myself that what I think is normal and what I think is safe and what I think is secure is like chalk and cheese for the child, I can then create the space, and maybe I just adjust the way that I do things a little to provide some sort of scaffolding and structure, you know, for them, and some safety netting for them while they go through the big emotion. And then when they've come out the other side and they're a bit more regulated, then maybe we can talk about what happened, you know, keep them safe from their own sense of, you know, imminent harm and risk of harm to themselves and to others. And yeah, you know, remind ourselves that it's scary for them.
Yeah, and Mara, I know you've mentioned before about being like, knowing it's not about you, you know, and that it's not a personal thing.
It's not.
Yeah,
and the safer, yeah, and the safer children have felt with me, the more I've seen the behaviour. So it's almost like there's a honeymoon period where everyone's on good behaviour bonds. You know, we commit to being kind and nice to each other, and then you're still here. You know, the children are still in my care, and they haven't moved on yet. They haven't gone somewhere next. And as they start to feel safer and more comfortable, the challenges in their behaviour start to escalate, and that makes sense because they're feeling safer with me. They're feeling like I'm someone who's not going to give up on them. They feel like I'm someone who can be trusted. So, you know, as awful as that is to be the adult, it's also the privilege and the you know, the humbling experience that a total stranger who has lost all control in their life and for their destiny when they've walked into my home is now finding safety in an adult enough to say, I'm going to be my ugliest and see what you do with me. Yeah.
Thanks, Meryl. Thanks for sharing. Was there anything that you wanted to add to that, Paula?
Well, yeah, just, I mean, touching on what Meryl said around the mirror, I mean, we know that young people, particularly in residential care, often come with complex trauma and associated, often really challenging behaviours. And so hearing their voice through some of those really challenging behaviours is tricky. And I've lived it, I've worked it, I totally understand how hard it can be. But I think what we often see in residential care is that staff are almost taught to be really bold, be strong, you know, don't show any emotion or response. And often it's those workers that get put in the toughest of homes, to be honest, because they can manage the behaviours. But this approach actually does nothing to support what these young people need. If anything, what residential workers or child protection workers need to do more so than anything is actually show genuine reaction to being hurt. Hurtful words do hurt me, and maybe I'll cry because it was really mean. Or if you use violence, if you use aggression, I'm going to be really upset, and it might take me a little bit of time to get over it. We might need to talk, we might need to have a meeting, but I'm still here for you. So I think with that violence and aggression, just more than anything, I know we're running out of time, but just making sure that the workers at the front line, it's not just about being strong and being bold and putting up a strong face. You actually need to give a real world parental response to these young people to show that you are human and that it's not normal to be abusive. It's not normal to be violent and aggressive. And I'm not just going to disappear on you and be moved to another house when you do that. I'm here for the long run. I'm here to support you. And your words do mean something to me because I'm a person. That is one of the key things we can actually do to make sure that young person feels an authentic engagement. They're then more likely to share their true voice with you. And obviously, hopefully, sustain the placement so that the young person doesn't keep getting moved around every time they become violent or aggressive.
Yeah, thanks, Paula. And what about for you, Dana?
I think just a final word really just builds on to both what Meryl and Paul are saying, is that I think in all of this, we really need to understand our own selves in this. what is it that triggers you? What is it that your body goes through when you experience these things? It's really learning about that and understanding that, and that by doing that in various whatever techniques you can apply to do that, whether it's applying polyvagal theory and exploring it for yourself, somatic experience, embodied practices, mindfulness, awareness, whatever it is, that you do practice in that, because that will help you bring your very best self when these things happen.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dana. Thank you. And yes, I'm mindful of the time that's absolutely flown. I'll wrap up now, but we will, as I said, have some more questions answered by this panelist in the extended Q&A. But I just want to say a massive thank you to Meryl, Dana and Paula. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. I want to thank the audience for joining us as well, and also to the AIFs communications team and the Child and Family Evidence and Evaluation team, who have been doing lots of stuff behind the scenes for us. Please subscribe to the AIFs newsletter if you'd like to be notified when this recording will be available. It should be about 2 weeks. And just a reminder about that feedback survey that will pop up. We do really appreciate your feedback, so please do share with us. And also just wanted to note, some of you might not know that the AIFs conference is coming up in June. So that's really about showcasing research for the wellbeing of families across Australia. So early bird registration's available in another couple of weeks. And you can visit the AIFs website to find out more, and you can register now to get updates too. So really looking forward to you all joining us at our next webinar, which is on next week, and it's about how a village approach can support infant and toddler mental health. And so take care. We'll see you again, and bye for now. Okay, well, thank you for joining us for this extended Q&A with Meryl, Dana and Paula. So just a couple of extra questions to ask our panelists. And I wanted to jump in first and ask you to kick us off, Paula. So when we're talking about providing children with a voice, having input onto the things that impact them, how do you manage what the child's asking for, what the child needs, and perhaps those obligations to meet certain criteria within the system?
Yeah, thanks. Look, I think what we often find is that, the child protection worker has obligations to make decisions around that child's life. They are given, I guess, a whole range of powers in their scope of their role to make the decisions to enable that young person to have all that they need in their life. And then if you look at residential workers, which is certainly my area of work, they have an obligation to provide care. Now, what this often creates is a power dynamic that is particularly challenging, not only for the young person to understand their place in it, but it's also challenging for the child protection worker and also the residential care worker. And you've often got a scenario of everyone pointing a finger at someone else to try and work out, well, who's going to meet this young person's needs and who gets to make the decisions around their care. If I'm also focused on the residential care side of things, the young person goes into their care. Often what we do see is some challenging behaviours might come up because children in residential care have often had a range of failed placements, perhaps in family-based care, prior to going to residential care. So you've got a facility that's got a young person who's got some fairly confronting behaviours, really hard to manage, and that residential facility also has no power and control over some of the decisions around that young person's life. The young person looks to the child protection worker. The child protection worker decides when they see their parent, what school they go to, if they're approved for a new iPad, if they're approved for clothes, if they're approved to see their mum an extra day. And so you've got this really uneasy power dynamic of the residential care provider trying to, I guess, mimic a home-like environment and mimic, I guess, a normal parental response, but yet the young person sees them as nobody. And so putting any kind of boundaries or structure around that care is particularly hard because the young person will just always revert to the child protection caseworker. So my main, I guess, advice or encouragement to any practitioners, child protection workers, to work with the residential care facility around empowering them to make more decisions around that young person's life. And to be honest, the residential facility working with the child protection worker to identify what decisions are within their realm of the role. This would create more so the young person seeing the home that they're in, the residential service, as their main primary caregiver. It will then enable the residential facility to manage some of those behaviours in a more effective way, because the young person sees them as being in a position of power, in a position of being able to make decisions around their life. So above all else, really, it's about that child protection worker identifying and recognising that the residential facility is best placed to perhaps make some of those decisions around the child's needs.
Oh, great, thanks, Paula. And what about from your perspective as a foster mum, Meryl? How do you balance those sorts of things?
It's very similar to what a residential care experience is, where it's about normalising decision making and the processes of decision making for children within a family unit. And part of that is empowering foster parents to actually be able to navigate and respond and put in those decision making processes in as normalized a way as possible. So I spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the child. I'm not suggesting that I'm the only one who knows best, but we're a collective of people who all know something about the child. When it comes to those small day-to-day decisions, allowing the foster parents to be able to actually implement those decisions, giving us guidance and parameters for what decisions we can make and we can support the children to make. You know, things like iPads or new shoes or those sorts of things. You know, connecting in with foster parents in the process of that. And I think the other part really is uncertainty is actually a valid and normalized experience for everybody. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Children don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the idea that everything has to be certain isn't actually a normalized experience. It's okay as a practitioner or as a foster mum to say, I don't know what's going to happen next time you go to a placement. I don't know when you're going to go to a placement. I'm really not sure when you're going to be able to see mum and dad again. I'm not sure which school you're going to be able to go to, but while we're together, let's see if we can find that out. And if I can find it out by asking your child protection worker or your social worker or your psychologist, I'll help you to make sure that you are heard and that what it is that you are wanting to say is understood by all the other adults in your life. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I know that I'm going to make sure you're not alone in that process.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Meryl. It's a good reminder that, you know, none of us are ever quite certain all the time. Yeah. And one final question for our time today. I wanted to ask you, Dana, what advice would you give to practitioners on how they can work more collaboratively with child protection agencies?
Mm-hmm. So I want to really start sort of answer this in a more broad way and really invite people to really reflect and be aware of their position in this system. So I think first of all, you know, I mentioned earlier around complex systems and how there's so many different people and parts and levels and etc. One of the things that I've observed in my years of work inside the system and alongside it is that we end up creating stories about us and them. The us is the people that are doing the good work. We know what's best. We do the right thing, etc. The them are the people that don't know what they're doing. that don't do the right thing, that make the mistakes, that aren't doing what we ask them to do, etc. And what happens when we set up that kind of dichotomy is that we end up focusing on each other and not actually what we're doing. And what are we really here for? Yeah, it's children and young people in out-of-home care. So what I'd be really focused on is, and I really wanted people to invite people to do this over the next couple of weeks after you see this. Where are you seeing that happening? Well, you're starting to see blame occur and othering. They do this, we do that, comparisons, whatever it is. But also I want you to really be aware of how power influences that. How is power in the system, and how does power in a room change the way you behave and the way others behave? And that we bring an awareness to that, and that we make sure that whatever we're doing it with a deep awareness for the benefit of children and young people in out-of-home care. Not for our own egos, not for the system's ego or any of that, but that we're really aware of what we're doing. So I answer that very, very broadly because I think all of us can have a greater awareness to how we better collaborate in a system as tricky as this one. So yeah, really inviting you just to look around and listen.
Yeah, great point for reflection. As you say, after people watch this, have a think about what you're noticing about those things. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, we will leave it there for today. I just want to say another big thank you to Dana, Meryl and Paula for joining us and for sharing with us today. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much, and goodbye for now.